Welcome everyone to DevOps Pro Europe. I'm Rob Richardson, and today we're going to build a DevOps pipeline live. It's really cool because we're going to build a DevOps pipeline that deploys containers to Kubernetes. Come join us. Here's the part where I tell you I am definitely going to post the slides on my site tonight. But in this talk, there are no slides. Now, the code is online right now. Let's head over to github.com. And we can see here's that URL, github.com/robrich/levelupdevops GitHub Actions Kubernetes. But yeah, there's no code here. This is an empty repository. We're going to fill it here live on stage. Now, if that's a mouthful of a URL, totally makes sense. Let's come to robrich.org, click on presentations here at the top, and here's Level Up Your DevOps with GitHub Actions and Kubernetes on the DevOps Pro Europe site. For DevOps Pro Europe. You can get to the GitHub repository straight away from here. While we're here on robrich.org, let's click on About Me and learn about some of the things that I've done recently. I'm a friend of Redgate, a Docker captain, a Microsoft MVP and MCT, and I'm a Jetpack developer advocate. So if you need help deploying to Kubernetes, we can definitely help. One of the things that I really enjoy, AZ Give Camp. AZ Give Camp brings volunteer developers together with charities to build free software. We start building software Friday after work. Sunday afternoon, we deliver the completed software to charities. Sleep is optional, caffeine provided. If you're in Phoenix, come join us for the next AZ Give Camp. Or if you'd like a Give Camp here in Europe or wherever you're connecting from, hit me up on email or Twitter and let's get a Give Camp installed in your neighborhood too. Some of the other things that I've done, I do a lot with containers and Docker. I was recently named the Docker Tip of the Captain's Hat Award for 2022, and so that was really fun. One of the things I'm particularly proud of, I replied to a .NET Rocks podcast episode. They read my comment on the air, and they sent me a mug. Woo! So there's my claim to fame, my coveted .NET Rocks mug. So we want to build a website and deploy it as a container into Kubernetes. Let's do that. So here I have nothing in my Kubernetes cluster. My directory is empty. Let's scaffold out a website. Now we could use lots of tools to scaffold it out. I'm going to use .NET New to scaffold out a website just because it allows me to create a website from scratch. That's cool. .NET New, I'm going to give it a name. I'm going to say an MVC site, MVC. I'll give it a name of Level Up DevOps and an output folder of .NET. Now, both of those parameters are optional, the name and the level up DevOps. If I didn't give it a name, it would use my folder name, in this case, demo. And if I didn't give it an output folder, it would create a new folder inside this folder. So to keep it in the current folder, I'll put it output to the current folder, and I'll give it a name that makes sense. Let's open this in VS Code, and now we've got this website. Here's our home controller, and that's great. We can flip over to our views and we have an index view and it says welcome. Let's say welcome to DevOps Pro Europe. That's awesome. Now that we've got our website, let's talk about how we might get it into GitHub. So let's create a new file. This is a .gitignore. And here in this .gitignore file, we want to list all the files that we don't want in our repository. Now they break into a couple of groups. We don't want built files. So we have our bin and obj. We definitely don't want those in bin, obj. Maybe we have a dist folder or a build folder. We don't want those in our repository. Oh, thank you, VS Code. Yes, I do want to create the VS Code. And that nicely sets us for our next setup, which is user-specific files. So the .vs code folder, the .vs folder if we're inside Visual Studio, star.user, star.suo, all the user-specific files we don't want in our Git repository. Next, we don't want downloaded files. So we don't want the node modules folder. We're in a .NET project, a .NET Core project, so we don't have a packages folder. But if we were in .NET Framework, then a packages folder would make sense. And we also don't want temp files. So star.tmp, star.log, Git will do star.orig sometimes as a temp file. We don't want any of those temp files in our checkout repository, in our source code. We also don't want secrets. Now, in this project, we don't have any secrets here, but we might choose to put secrets in our app settings.json. That would not be a good idea. We want to put those in user secrets somewhere else. But we might have a .env file that we want to keep out of our repository. So we'll just say .env star. Excellent. So we don't want to include built files, user-specific files, downloaded files, temp files, or secrets in our GitHub repository. Next, we want to create details for getting this content into Docker. Our first step is a Docker file, a .docker ignore file, .docker ignore. Now, the cool thing about our .docker ignore file is it has the exact same syntax as our git ignore file. So let's go grab our git ignore file and set it here in our docker ignore file. In fact, if you don't have a .docker ignore file, but you do have a .git ignore file, then Docker will use that instead. Now, there's one more section of content that we don't want to include inside of our production container, and that is non-production configuration files. So non-prod environment files, and we have some of those. We have this app settings.development.json, and we also have here inside properties launch settings.json. Now, launch settings.json is all of the details that we need to be able to debug our application. Definitely important if we're debugging it, but definitely not important in a production container. So we've got that set up. Now that we've got our .docker ignore, the next step is for us to create a Docker file. So let's create a Docker file. And if we accidentally named it dockerfile.txt, easy enough, rename that and pull off the .txt. Now I've got the VS Code plugin for Docker, so I have the nice icon here. But if it just shows a regular file, that's totally fine. Next, we want to set up the content associated for this file. So we'll have a from line, we'll have copy lines, we'll have run lines, and we'll have CMD lines. Now, there are definitely other commands inside of Docker, but with these four, we can read and write most Docker files. So we'll focus on these. We'll get to see some more today as well, but these will be the four that we'll really focus in on. To start out with, we want to do from. We want to stand on the shoulders of giants, so let's head over to Docker Hub and take a look at .NET images. This is a meta repo. I searched for .NET here and I got to the .NET repo. And so .NET samples is interesting. That shows lots of different configurations of different Docker files in different ways. .NET Monitor is great for being able to check up on .NET things. .NET Runtime Deps, that's what we would need to install Docker, but it doesn't have Docker installed. Runtime does have .NET installed rather, and so it's built on top of Runtime Deps. On top of Runtime is ASP.NET that includes the details that we would need to run an ASP.NET website. And on top of that is SDK that includes the build tools. Now that's what we'll need to be able to build our application. So let's fire this one up and take a look at what we need. Now, here's the image that we want to grab. That base image, we're using .NET 6, so that's perfect. If we scroll down, we can see other versions of this application. Here's .NET 6, the one we're using, and it's based on Debian. But Alpine is a really, really small Linux distribution, so instead, let's use 6.0-Alpine. Back in our Docker file, from that -Alpine. Now we have our build tools inside of our container. Perfect. Now we want to copy our content. We want to copy all of the content from here, where we run our Docker build command, into the current directory in our image. Well, where is that current directory? Let's set the work dir to /src. Now we could set it to var lib foo bar, but src gets it done for me. So we've copied all of our content into place except for everything that we chose to ignore with our .docker ignore file. So even if we specifically tried to copy it, it would not go with this with the .docker ignore file. So we've got our content into place, and now we want to run some commands. Now, if we were on the console, we would do this. We would say .NET restore. That would restore our NuGet packages, all of our dependencies. .NET build. We want to build in release mode. .NET test. We'll do this in release mode as well so that we don't end up with one debug build and one release build. This will fire off all of our unit tests. In this project, we don't have any, but it's good code hygiene. And then .NET publish. We'll do this in release mode, and we'll do it to the dist folder. Now, this publish is not that unlike a right-click publish inside of Visual Studio, but we're doing it here in this DevOps build, so we'll ensure that it is consistent every time. Now, these are the commands that we would run from the console. We want to run them as Docker commands. So let's run this one, let's run this one, let's run this one, let's run this one, and now we've got all of these commands run at build time inside of our Docker file. And next, the CMD, the thing that we'll do as we start our image as a container. We want to say .NET level up devops.dll, and that will get our content into place. Now, we do want to grab a few environment variables, so I'll just copy and paste those here into place. Nope, not that one. Copy the environment variables, not the code comment. There we go. This tells ASP.NET to run in production mode, to listen on port 80, and we'll expose port 80 so that incoming traffic in Docker will get to the correct spot in our container. Now, this Docker file would work out great. We could use it in production, but we've broken one of the rules of thumb here with Docker files. We have a compiler inside of our production runtime container. Now, we don't want a compiler because that increases our attack surface. If someone was able to pop this container, they could compile something else and run that in our container instead of what we expected. So we want just the runtime, not the compiler, in our production container. Back here on Docker Hub, let's pull up the ASP.NET one. That one only includes the details necessary to run a website, but not to build a website. So we have this base image, that's perfect. And we can see if we scroll down, there is also an Alpine variant, 6.0-Alpine. Let's use that. So let's split this image in half. I'm going to say from this Alpine, and now we have our production runtime server image and our build server image. Now, I put server in air quotes because they're not really servers, they're containers. But we can think of this like the build server with all of our build tools on it, and the production container without the build tools, just with the production details. Now, we do need to do a little bit here. We'll say work dir is /app, and we'll copy our content from the dist folder into that app folder. Now, right here, it would look for a dist folder over here. We've specifically chosen to ignore that in our Docker ignore file, so it wouldn't find it anyway. We need to say we want to copy this from equals build. Now, where is build? Let's name this one as build. So now it's going to copy the dist folder from the build stage right here, and that will only include the content that we built. That's perfect. We only have a few layers, it's really lightweight, and it'll start up really fast. There's one more thing that we can do here in our Docker file to make it a little bit more production ready. Right now we're copying all of our files, and then we're restoring our dependencies. So if I come in here and I change a CSS file or a JavaScript file, I will invalidate this Docker layer. So we'll redo this one, and then we'll re-restore our dependencies. Now, I probably want to do this in a little bit different order, because if I were to just change a JavaScript file, I don't want to have to re-restore my NuGet package dependencies again. I want to restore my NuGet packages, then copy all my files, then build, test, and deploy. If I'm just trying to iterate really quickly on my development machine, this will make the build run a little bit faster, because now I've cached my dependencies. Perfect. Now I do need to copy in my manifest to say what is my, what NuGet packages do I need to restore. So let's copy in this CS proj into the current folder. Then we'll restore our NuGet packages. Then we'll copy everything else. Then we'll build, test, publish, and flip over into our production runtime one and copy that content into place and start it. Excellent. So now we have a great production runtime. Next, let's go grab the Kubernetes YAML that we need. I'm going to go reach into the stash where I did this last time and pull it into place. Let's just copy it from the last project we did. So in particular, if we pop open this Kubernetes YAML file, we can see it says last time. Yeah, whatever project I did on the previous time, let's just reuse this file. But I'm gonna replace last time with level up DevOps. And now I've got that project ready to go. Now this includes a deployment. We only have one replicate in this case. It has a service that allows us to load balance across all of those pods. It has ingress that allows us to map a URL into the service inside of our cluster. But we also have these replacement expressions, AKS URL, ACR URL, image label. These are things that we'll set in our build. We don't want these secrets leaking into source control, and so we don't want to check those into place. So I've got my Kubernetes YAML file with these replacement expressions, some of them build specific, some of them secrets. Next, let's create a README. So here's my new file, readme.md, and let's go grab some README content. Here is the content that we want in our README file, and that looks good. I think we've got a website that's ready for us to deploy up to Kubernetes. So let's take a look at our stuff. We'll stage all these changes. Now I'm going to go look through this, make sure I'm not committing any user-specific files, any downloaded libraries, any secrets, any built files, and so far it looks like it's pretty good. So DevOps Pro Europe, DevOps pipeline. Or actually, this is just the website. Excellent. So I've committed that content, and that looks great. Let's now push it up to our GitHub repository. Git push origin main. Now, if you've been following along and looking forward to the source code here in this repository, if that push is done, yep, then I can refresh this repository, and now the code that we just built is up on GitHub. Excellent. Now this wasn't quite a completely empty repository. I did create some secrets here. I went in here to settings, I went into secrets, and I created some secrets. I created ACR password, ACR URL, ACR username. Those will help us log into our private container registry. Also the AKS URL so that we can route content publicly, and a kube config so that we can authenticate into our cluster. So we'll use those 5 secrets inside of our DevOps pipeline. Let's head off to Actions and set up our DevOps pipeline here in GitHub Actions. Now there's lots of templates that we could choose from. .NET, publish a container, .NET Desktop, lots of different deployment options, lots of security and continuous integration and automation options, and lots more that we can discover here. Now I'm going to not do that. I will set up a workflow ourselves so that we can take complete control over this. But this is just a file inside the .github/workflows folder. I will call this docker kubernetes.yaml, and we can craft this file to be whatever we want it to be. So let's say this is docker build and push kubernetes start. When do we want to run this? Well, we want to run it on our main branch for sure. Let's come back to pull requests. That'll be fun to build later. We also want this workflow dispatch. Now that will allow us to push a build button here so that we don't need to, for example, commit whitespace just to kick off a build. When we have this workflow dispatch, we can kick off a build manually. Now, what is this going to do? Well, let's look at the steps that we'll do. Well, it'll run on Ubuntu. Excellent. And The first step it will do is to check out our code, and then we can run various commands. Now we could run a single line script or a multi-line script or any other tasks. In this case, let's run a multi-line script. And this will be our docker build and push kubectl apply. Now, what are the steps that we want to do? Well, the first thing we want to do is a docker build, and let's tag it straight away. So I'm going to tag it as level up DevOps, but really I want to tag it to match my registry so that I can push that into place. We have those secrets. How might we leverage them in the build? So let's go to the documentation. We went into settings, we created some secrets, and here's how we would use them in our DevOps pipeline. $curly secrets dot that secret name. Excellent. So let's go grab this and we'll set it in place in our DevOps pipeline. I want to say, instead of super secret, I'm going to say ACR URL. Now it will tag it with the URL of my private registry so that I can get it into my private registry just with a Docker push of that thing. I'll also label it with the git hash. So let's say github.sha. Now that is definitely not semantic versioning, semver, but it is a unique hash per commit. So now if I want to get back to the source code that built this, I can just look up that SHA and get straight back to the source code that created it. Excellent. So now that I've tagged it with that, I can push it there. Let's copy this. Let's paste it there. And now I've pushed it up to my private registry. Well, kind of. I'm going to get an authentication failure. So let's add a step that will log into Docker. Let's come in here and we'll take a look at our content. And let's look for Docker login. Ooh, this one looks like a good one. Now we can take a look at our full marketplace listing and see all of the different pieces of how this action works. We can probably get to the source code that was created for this. It'll give us some example builds here, and that's great to be able to see how it's used. But the interesting part that I want to grab is this YAML that accomplishes that process. So I'm going to copy that YAML. Let's paste it right there. I'll need to indent it a little bit better. There we go. And now let's start configuring this. Now, what is my registry? Well, I have a secret for that. Secrets.acr URL. That's the registry that I want to get to. My username, good thing I have a secret for that. Secrets.acr username, perfect. I want a password for my registry, so let's grab the secret for that. Secrets.acr password, perfect. We aren't using ECR. And now log out. I'm going to say log out true. Now this doesn't log out at the end of this particular step, but rather at the end of all of the steps, at the end of our build. Now in this case, with using GitHub Actions on their platform, they're automatically going to destroy our machine, which will kill our secrets at the end of our build anyway. But if we were on a shared host, maybe on a private host, then we would definitely want to delete our secrets so the next build couldn't automatically pick those up. In this case, it doesn't matter, but good hygiene, let's definitely log out. So now when we Docker push, we can get it to our private registry. Perfect. The next step for us to do is kubectl apply-f k8s.yaml. We want to set our secrets in place inside of our Kubernetes, set our content in place inside of Kubernetes. Now we're going to need to log into Kubernetes, so let's come back to our marketplace and search for Kubernetes set context. So we've got this Kubernetes set context, and we could definitely look at more details for this, but I think that's going to be fine. I'll copy this, set it in place right here. I'll need to indent it a little bit better. There we go. Now, what we're after here is the method. The default method is kubeconfig. We'll use that one, which allows us to set our kubeconfig here. So we've got a secret for that, secrets.kubeconfig. And there's that kubeconfig ready to go. We don't need the rest of these because we use the kubeconfig method, so we'll just delete all those. And now we're logged into Kubernetes. Excellent. Now we do need to replace these replacement expressions here in our Kubernetes YAML file. ACR URL, image label, AKS URL. So I'm just going to copy and paste this because the command is a little gnarly, but then let's walk through it. I'm going to, in the KDES YAML file, I'm going to replace the content without a backup. I'm going to change ACR URL to secrets.acr URL, the text AKS URL to the value of the secret, and the text image label to the GitHub SHA. Now, I'm specifically doing it right here. If we were to, for example, put it right here, and then we would replace all our secrets, and then if, for example, here in our Docker ignore file, we forgot to ignore the k8s.yaml file in our secrets section, oops, then these secrets would end up getting copied into our container. And so if someone was able to pop our container, they would have the secrets. That's definitely not what we want. So we're going to not do that before we do this. We're going to wait until after we've pushed that container, it's already gone doing the things, and then we'll change those secrets into place. Excellent. So we're going to do a Docker build. We'll push that into our registry that we've logged into previously. We'll replace the secrets in our KDES YAML file, log into, and then push that into our Kubernetes cluster that we've logged into previously. So let's commit this. Add GitHub Actions DevOps pipeline. And now that just becomes a regular file in our repository. It's in the .github/workflows folder, but if we wanted to just come back in and edit it again, then we would get back to this spot where we have the marketplace and we can add additional actions that way. But it's also just a file in our repository. So I'm going to come here and I'm going to say git pull, and now we've got that file here inside our folder, and we could just pop open that file and continue modifying it. But because it is a file inside .github/workflows, then it did kick off a build too. So here's that spot showing that we've got a build running. Let's go into the details. Now it's going to do all of those steps. It logged into Docker Hub, our private registry. It logged into Kubernetes. It did all the processes in our Docker file. And then once it's out of the Docker file, then we're pushing that up to our container registry, and then we'll start it inside of Kubernetes. And it looks like it just finished. And the build is green. Excellent. So we were able to deploy our website into Kubernetes. Now it does take a little bit for the DNS to propagate inside of Kubernetes. So let's see if we can port forward in to make that process a little faster. We can port forward into a particular pod or into a deployment or into a service. Let's do that. Let's port forward into a service. kubectl get all and ingress, and we can see that that content is now running inside of Kubernetes. So let's kubectl port forward from into that service /level up DevOps, and we'll forward port 80 from our local machine into port 80 inside the service. But maybe we have something else running on port 80 on our local machine, so we'll do port 8080 from our local machine. Excellent. So we've got that port forward in place, and now let's come to localhost 8080, and we can see our website. Welcome to DevOps Pro Europe. It is running right now inside of Kubernetes. That is great. One of the things that's particularly cool is if we take a look at this, kubectl describe this pod, because we deployed it with that image label in the content, we can see that it's grabbed this particular image label, and we even put in a secret here, the version, and so that is the version of the source code that is running inside this container. If ever I find an issue with this particular web application, I can just git check out that code started on my local machine, and I know I'm running exactly the code that's running inside the server. Excellent. So we set aside pull requests. Let's come back to that. Here in our build, we want to be able to support pull requests. Now we could do some conditional logic because we don't really want to push content into production based on pull requests. So we might say something like, if the branch is correct, and that would get pretty hairy because our pull request build is going to be substantially different than our regular build. So let's create a new file here. I'm going to say new file, docker pr.yaml, and we'll grab the Kubernetes YAML file and paste that into our PR YAML. Let's change the name here, docker build a PR. And here we'll also say docker build a PR. Now, we don't want to send this up to Kubernetes. We don't want to run that in production just because you created a pull request. So let's delete that. Because we're not sending it to Kubernetes, we don't need to log into Kubernetes. Let's delete that. So we also don't need to change the secrets. Let's delete that. We don't even want to push this image up to our container registry because we don't want to accidentally start your pull request in production just grabbing a random version. So now we don't even need to log into Docker, so let's delete that. I'm even going to take it a step farther and say we don't even need the private registry in the URL. I'll just say level up DevOps-PR as my image name. Now I am still building this image, so I am running all of the steps here in the Docker file. It's going to copy my manifest, NuGet restore to grab all of my libraries, build my content, test the content, publish it, and copy this into a new container. So if I have a failing unit test or my build doesn't run in the PR, then it will still fail to execute my DevOps pipeline correctly. I'm just not going to deploy it to anywhere because, well, this is just a pull request. Now, we want to now change these. I want to do this on not main. Our other branch works on main. And we want to do pull request. We'll do branches here, and we'll say we want this to build on all branches. Now, this is great. For collaborators, people who have access to this repository, they'll probably use this way, where they're creating different feature branches to build their content. For outside contributors who don't have access to write to our repository, they'll create a pull request from a branch in their own repository. So by having these, we'll be able to handle both types of builds. That's excellent. So we're building a PR, and let's also, while we're here, create a status badge on our repository. It'd be cool to be able to show the status of our build here. Back inside our repository, let's go into GitHub Actions, pull up our build, and we'll grab a status badge. Now it automatically creates the markdown that we need to put in our readme.md. So copy that here. We'll come back into our readme.md, and let's paste that. Let's put it right there. Excellent. So now that I've got the new pull request build built, let's come in here and we'll commit the content. I'll stage all these changes, and we can take a look at all the files and see what's different. Well, here in our Docker file, we added the k8s YAML file so that we don't accidentally delete those, deploy those secrets rather. Excellent. We've got the change in the README to add the status badge. That looks great. We've got, it looks like I modified spaces here inside the Docker Kubernetes build, and we have the new Kubernetes, the new Docker pull request build. So let's add status badge and PR build, and we'll commit this. Now last time we did a git push from the command line. Here, let's do a git push from here. We'll push this up to our repository. So it's going to send that one commit up to our GitHub repo. And if we come back in here, we now have that new content in place. So here in our workflows folder, we now have 2 YAML files. And because we made a change in our main branch, we got a new build. Excellent. Now, last time we went in this way. This time, let's go in the other way. I'm going to click on Actions, and then we could choose the particular build, but in this case, we're looking at all builds. So let's dig into this one. We're after the build stage, so let's run that, and it's going to do all of the steps inside of our build. It logged into Docker, logged into Kubernetes, and now it's doing the Docker build. So it copied in our level up DevOps.cs proj, it restored our NuGet packages, it's running a .NET build, it looks like our build succeeded. Now it's running test. We don't have any tests, so that succeeded. We publish. Now in our new image, the one that doesn't include build tools, we'll finish up that build, push that up to our GitHub, our private container registry, and then start that content inside of Kubernetes. So it looks like that build went green as well. That's excellent. And now we have a status badge here showing us that our build passed. Similarly, we can come here into Kubernetes, kubectl get all, and we have a new pod that started, this pod right here. Let's take a look at that pod, but before we do, git log -- one line, we can see that our latest commit is E0cc42f. And so let's do a kubectl describe this pod and see if 0ECC is the version that is running. Yes, we've got E0cc42 as our image ID, and we've got E0cc42 as the version label on our pod. That is excellent. So we saw how easy it was to build up a DevOps pipeline. We scaffolded out a brand new website. We built up a Docker file together with our Docker ignore file. We published that using GitHub Actions into Kubernetes, and you can now grab this code right now from robrich.org/presentations or this exact URL to get into the GitHub repository. This has been a lot of fun getting to show you level up your DevOps with GitHub Actions here at DevOps Pro Europe. I'll join you in that spot where the conference has designated live Q&A. Or if you're watching this video later, hit me up on Twitter at Rob_Rich or click the Contact Me button on my website. I'll see you online. Thanks, everyone.